Hello, everyone. Welcome to the May Ask It Experts. We're so excited you're here. Heard the parking lot's a little bit challenged, so I'm expecting we'll have some more people coming on in. I want to thank you for attending this event today. I think it's going to be fantastic. Obviously, great people of reputation and great speakers. I'm Lisa Arneson. I'm the Workforce and Education Coordinator for the Tri-City Regional Chamber. And we really appreciate our sponsor, STCU, for making this event possible. We will have some drawings at the end of the event today. So if you haven't dropped in your business card, do so. If you don't have a business card, there is some blank paper for you at the desk where you can put your name on there. So at this time, I'll go ahead and ask everyone that's in the room to say your name and the company you're with. And if you're joining us on Zoom, go ahead and type in your name and the company you're with on Zoom, because we love to get that information. So I think I'm going to do a little different today. I'm going to start back corner, go across the room like this. So there's someone in the chairs. Okay, chairs, start first. So your name and company you're with.
My name is Eric. I am with Columbia Ability Alert.
Nice.
RJ, and we're Team Property Management.
Fantastic.
On the left, I'm fantastic.
Okay, and then we'll go back over to Chuck.
Chad Yost, Community First Bank, HFP Trust, soon to be happening.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
Right, Community First Bank also.
I am Stephanie Flesh, and I'm the owner of Three Cedars Bookkeeping.
Hi, I'm Olivia with ABC Dynamic.
I am Sophia with ABC Dynamic.
Okay.
Any with interest community services.
List of interest community services.
Christine Rosedale, former owner of Visiting Angels.
Irish Christ with L2 Wealth Management.
Kim Parrott with Columbia Ability Alliance.
Sherry Monty, Columbia Ability. Jeannie Dillon. General Columbia Ability Alliance.
Lori Lancaster, Ben Franklin Fair Rodeo, and not here to step up to my goal.
I feel like he's stacked.
Michelle Hill, I'll have ready. Iowa Mitchell will have them as well.
Okay.
Justin Falls, Community Ability Line.
Sarah Howe, Columbia Ability Alliance, and I'm here to suck up to both Michael and Brian.
Okay.
Ricky Mills with Costa Vida.
Okay, and at this time, I'd like to introduce Lauren from STCU to come say a few words.
Yes.
Again, we appreciate our sponsor.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lauren Wildish. I'm the manager of the Queensgate office of STCU. Super excited to be here. STCU is very excited to partner with the Tri-City Regional Chamber of Commerce to offer these monthly complimentary sessions. As a leader myself, I understand how important it is to build that trust with my team. And I try my best to do that by demonstrating authenticity, transparency, and self-accountability. By embracing these ideals, leadership skills are strengthened and teams are inspired to achieve their highest potential. I look forward to spending the rest of the time together and learning more from our esteemed colleagues here. And thank you so much for coming to Ask the Experts.
Thank
you.
We're very grateful to them. So thanks so much, Lauren, for representing today. Our topic this month is Goldilocks leadership, authenticity, accountability, and framing. And if you didn't pick up at the back, there's 4 handouts. So if you need to go back there and grab a set, we'll take care of that. But there are 4 handouts that the speakers are going to use throughout today. I'm going to go ahead and introduce them, read their bios, and then we'll kick it off. So our first speaker is Audrey Baker. She's the Executive Director of the Washington State Leadership Board, WSLB, where she leads the statewide efforts to cultivate the next generation of ethical, capable, and inspired leaders. We could just stop there. I love that. Throughout her time with WSLB, she has held key roles in program director and as the director of operation and development before becoming the executive director in 2023. Her focus includes strategic growth, organizational sustainability, and creating space for diverse voices at the table. She holds a Bachelor of Arts from the Evergreen State College, where she studied education, philosophy, and sociology. Before joining WSLB, she served in the office of a former lieutenant governor and in office of a chief budget writer representative in the Washington State Legislature. She gained valuable experience in policymaking and state budgeting, and her early work in healthcare operations further sharpened her systems thinking and leadership ability. She grew up and resides in Ellensburg, Washington, and outside the office, you'll find her playing the fiddle, which sounds so cool, and enjoying the outdoors with her dog Sunny. Next up will be Brian Moreno, who is a small business owner and coach based here in the Tri-Cities. He received his MBA from Washington State University and holds a master's degree in industrial organizational psychology from the Harvard Extension School. His work with teams centers on understanding social dynamics, leadership identities, and motivation. Brian's wife, Andrea, is also the director of Mickey's Chance Canine Rescue. And he didn't, but I'll add, you might have encountered him on one of the many boards or organizations he has served on here in the Tri-Cities. We appreciate all that. Last but not least, we have Michael Novakovic, CDME. This is awesome, is a Harley riding, scuba diving, drum playing adventurer. I had to practice that a lot. He serves as the president and CEO of Columbia Ability Alliance. He and his wife Shannon own NovaWorks, a consulting firm focusing on leadership development, strategy, and human resources. Michael holds an MBA from Washington State University, where he also graduated summa cum laude with a degree in business administration. He's currently pursuing a doctorate in organizational change and leadership from the University of Southern California. And him and his wife Shannon are the proud parents of a boxer pup named Breakus. Did I get it right? Also referred to as Achy Breaky, Breaky Boodles, or Breaky the Bad. So without further ado, I'm gonna go ahead and let Audrey kick it off.
Thank you, Lisa. Well, hello, everyone. I'm so honored to be here. My name's Audrey, and thank you for that great introduction. I currently serve as the director of the Washington State Leadership Board, which we are a trustee agency of Washington State charged with cultivating the next generation of young leaders. So it's such a treat to be here along with Brian and Michael, and we're each addressing a different angle to leadership. And in my presentation today, we're going to be chatting just a little bit about authenticity in leadership and how we show up. So, oh, look at that. Look at that one. All right, so I'd like to open with a question, not about anyone's job title here, your accomplishments, but more about your present. So if I asked one of your team or your colleagues or your family what it's like when you walk into the room, what would they have to say? And how do you show up? So I'd love to take a minute. You good?
It's terrible.
I'm gonna hold it together. So I'd love to take a minute and folks are welcome, you know, if you'd like to jot down a word or two that comes to mind, or if you just like to sit with that question for a beat. So we're gonna pause for a minute here and let's take some notes. Okay, so our rough minute is up, and I'm curious, would anyone be willing to share that word or those phrasing that came up for them?
Extra guac.
Extra guac, love that. Love it, good stuff. Anybody else?
I would say, present and focused.
Yeah. I wanna say a lot. I'm just say that. Yeah. Hey. They got like extra stuff. I love that. Yeah, extra walk, a lot. Cool. Thanks for sharing.
We have the same person that said happy.
Yeah, yeah, that's huge. Yeah, that's a pretty delicious. Anybody else before we move on? Okay. Before I move on, admittedly, did I hear that somebody here was from the rodeo association? Is that? Normally I would be standing. I tend to be a very like animated speaker. I got thrown off my cold last night, so. The back pain. And gonna stay seated. So anyways, apologies that I'm not up here in front of the screen, but thanks for hanging with the punches with me, folks. Okay, so for me, I'd love to take a little moment to share about, what this question means for me. And this question particularly really stopped me in my tracks a few years ago. And I realized at that time that I had been chasing this sort of idea of what a strong, successful female leadership looked like, right? Like confident, controlled, polished, super sharp. And on the inside, I realized I was really stressed out. I was super burnt out, and I was just second guessing every move. I mean, I would call up my colleagues and read them emails to be like, does this sound okay? Right? Super burnt out. So this mismatch between how I wanted to show up and how I was actually feeling was the beginning of a really important shift in my own leadership journey. And one day, one of my board members challenged me by offering some insight. And this was a board member that I had worked with over the years, and our professional relationship had really started off super rocky. But as we started to work together, I really started to understand sort of why he operated the way that he did. And he really became a friend and a mentor. So he told me in a bit of lesser words, you're leading the work, but you're not letting people see the real you. And it's the real you that people actually want to connect with, they want to trust, and they want to follow. And this completely wrecked me because he had not only figured me out, right, but he was totally right. So I thought to myself, if leadership isn't about projecting an image and meeting these deadlines and being in control and anything that falls in between that, then what is it about? So I started to get a lot more curious, and I started asking myself questions like, what would it take to not feel this way? What would it take to show up in the same way that I show up as a friend, a partner, a mentor, a daughter? And at that time, it really felt like I had completely edited myself out of my own leadership story. So today, I want to walk you through a different kind of leadership lens, one that's built on 3 anchors that I follow. And those anchors are awareness, noticing how your perception and presence shape the room, alignment, matching our values with our actions, and action, intentionally choosing how we respond when it matters most. Because the truth is, how we show up every single day is our leadership, and it's our legacy, and that's really what people. I almost said slide, but I am the master. Okay, so moving into the power of perception. So before we talk about how we show up authentically, let's take a moment to ask, why does any of this even matter? So Simon Sinek, who's an American author and inspirational speaker on business leadership, emphasizes that true leadership isn't about authority, it's about creating trust. So he says, quote, leadership is not about being in charge, it's about taking care of those in our charge. So in other words, trust and influence come from authentic care, consistency, and genuine connection, not necessarily authority or perfection. So to me, authenticity isn't just this sort of internal feeling. It requires a clear understanding on how we perceive others, how others perceive us, and how those perceptions shape our interactions. Anais Nin captions this beautifully, and she says, we do not see things as they are, we see them as we are. Our posture, our tone, our assumptions, our expectations, they all shape how we experience others and how they experience us. So these lenses that we're sort of calling to, they go everywhere with us, silently shaping all of these different interactions. So I'd like to take a moment to think about someone in your organization or your life, right, who was labeled as maybe difficult, they were challenging, they were maybe uncooperative, and how your perception of them was shaped by your own assumptions and experiences. So now imagine taking a breath, taking a pause, shifting your perception and becoming curious about what might be truly shaping their behavior and being curious about what hat they're wearing. So this intentional shift, this moment of noticing what I like to call the embodied perception or the embodied lens, I believe is exactly how authentic leadership began. It's choosing to respond consciously and respond as a kind of conscious author of our thoughts. And this sort of authentic leader becomes aware of this lens, not to control it, but to lead more presently and ultimately compassionately. So moving on, if our perceptions aren't neutral and our presence is always communicating something, then authenticity can't just be about honesty or transparency. It has to be about something and more. So I think this is alignment, right? I think it's the connection between what we believe internally and how we show up externally. Brene Brown, who I'm sure that name rings a bell to many folks in here, but just to kind of tell you about her, a lot of her work on vulnerability has quite profoundly reshaped modern leadership strategies. She describes authenticity as a daily courageous practice, and she calls it essentially the practice of letting go of who we think we're supposed to be and embracing who we truly are. So this tension is so much of what so many leaders feel. We're pulled between these expectations of others and the voice of our own values. And to me, authentic leadership really happens when we live from this inner compass. And that's where the work of Bill George comes in. Again, I'm sure a name that is familiar with a lot of folks in here. So Bill George, he's a former CEO of Medtronic. He's a senior fellow at Harvard Business School. He's got this incredible resume, work experience, and he is one of the leading voices in authentic leadership and practice. So his book, True North, outlines a framework that's been used by thousands of leaders across different sectors to navigate this sort of inner complexity that I think a lot of us have to address, but still staying grounded as who they are. So moving into these dimensions of an authentic leader. So Bill George proposes that the dimensions of an authentic leader include purpose, values, relationships, self-discipline, and heart. So beginning with purpose, what drives you, right? Authentic leaders are clear on their why. They know what impact they want to make, and that clarity gives their leadership direction. Moving into values. What do you stand for? Your values guide your decisions, especially when no one's watching, right? And when we're aligned with our values, we're, I think a lot less likely to get swayed by fear, pressure, or even sometimes ego. I'm guilty of that. Moving into relationships, who supports you, right? Leadership, like this isn't a solo act. We're not alone in this. And authentic leaders build honest, trusted relationships that reflect who they really are, not just their title and what they have to show for that. Self-discipline. How do you stay grounded? It's really easy to lose your way when things get chaotic and we're under a lot of pressure. Self-discipline keeps our behavior aligned with our values, even when that pressure is on and it's at full speed. And finally, which is one of my favorites, we have heart. Do we lead with courage and compassion? This is the piece that so many of us leaders avoid, but authentic leadership really requires emotional courage and the willingness to be vulnerable, to care deeply, and to lead with that empathy. So when these 5 dimensions are in sync, our leadership feels real, it feels consistent, and it feels trustworthy. And when even one is out of alignment, our team feels it, and for me, I mean, so do I. So do we. So we've talked about alignment between values and actions, but the real test of authenticity is how we lead when it counts. So not just when things are easy, but when we're tired, we're triggered, again, we're under pressure, or we're afraid of how we're gonna be perceived. I mean, again, I'm guilty of that when I think, how is my team gonna think about me in this situation, right? And I think that this is where authenticity moves from concept to practice, and it happens in the smallest, most ordinary ways. Like how we respond when when our ideas are challenged, when we get unexpected feedback, or when something completely fails. So I love this quote from Viktor Frankl. He was a psychiatrist, a Holocaust survivor, and the author of Man's Search for Meaning. If you haven't read that book, it's awesome. It's in the handout in one of the references that I shared. So anyways, if you're looking for some reading, check out that list. But he writes, between stimulus and response, there is space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies growth and freedom. So I think that this sort of space is where leadership happens. It's where authenticity happens. And it's the moment when we notice our default reaction, which could be defensiveness, urgency, retreat, and we choose to respond in a way that reflects our true values. And to me, I don't think we need hours to do this. We just need a beat. We need a second. So I would love to offer a real world example of this. Recently, I had to give some pretty difficult feedback to one of my team members, and my instinct was, to be over prepared, to be super polished, to be like maybe a little distant, so I wouldn't feel vulnerable, right? I'm gonna own that. But I took a minute, I took a beat, and I paused, and I remembered what I wanted to model to both myself, to stay true to my own authentic leadership, and also to the team that I serve. And those values being, openness, trust, and clarity, I showed up with a different set of notes and with what I like to think was a true presence. And that moment became so much less about sort of offering critique to my team member, and it became more about connection between us. And for me, that's something I really love about the Viktor Frankl insight. That space being between stimulus and response, that's where so much of our leadership lives. It's not always flashy, but it's real. And those small choices over time, they become our pattern, and our presence and our impact. This entirely is what leads this presentation to what I'd like to hit very briefly on, leads us to legacy. And our legacy necessarily isn't the job of, some of our job titles or what we've built on paper. It's how people feel in our presence. Again, especially when things get really tricky and really hard. So I'd like to think of a recent leadership moment. I'd like to ask you all to think of a recent leadership moment when you reacted quickly. And if you had taken a breath, what might you have done differently? How could you have shown up more aligned with your values and who it is that you want to be as a leader? So I'd love to take another moment for reflection. We'll take about a minute here. All right, I see pens move, my inner teacher, I see pens dropping, so we'll go ahead and move on, and spoiler alert, I'm not gonna ask anyone to share these vulnerable things, so we'll move on to the next slide. But my intention of some of these prompts is that you can take these home, right? You can reflect on them. So moving on, another quote. So when we talk about leadership legacy, we often think of these achievements, right? For in my line of work, at least kind of what's reflected in my resume, right? I think of like budgets, campaigns, great contracts, deals, right? But that's not really what people remember. People remember how we showed up when things got hard. They remember if they felt seen, if they felt respected, and if they ultimately felt safe around us. And they remember that if we led with presence and not just productivity. So that's why all of this, your lens, your alignment, your daily choices matter, because our legacies are being written every day and in the way that people experience us. So Maya Angelou really, to me, beautifully captures this and why this matters. And as leaders, our lasting legacy isn't just in our strategies or our successes, the check boxes marked. It's in the way people feel because of how we showed up for both them and ultimately for ourselves. So at the very beginning of this presentation, I asked you a question. If I asked your team, your colleagues, your family, what it's like when you walk into a room, what would they say, right? How do you show up? So now I want to return to this question, but let's flip it forward. And let's not make it about today. Let's make it 10 years from now. How do you want to be remembered 10 years from now? That space between how we show up and how we hope to be essentially remembered in our leadership journeys, that's where our authentic legacy is born. Again, let's take a quiet moment, just a minute, and let's do a quick reflection on that. You can write, you can think, you can just breathe, take a moment. But I'd love to invite everyone to let that sort of future vision and version of yourself take shape. Okay, so for the sake of time, I don't want to go over here. So we're going to bring this full circle, and this is sort of our closing slide here. So we've talked about awareness, how our perceptions and lenses shape the way we show up. We've talked about alignment, making sure our internal values are consistent with our responses. And we've talked about action, right? Those daily leadership moments where you can choose, we have the autonomy to choose how we respond with intention instead of just reacting from habit or panic. So all of this takes so much practice, and to me, it's how you build trust, right? Authentic leadership isn't about being polished or perfect. It's not always about, being about performance or about our titles. It's about presence, and that presence starts with a choice. So my call to you on your authentic leadership journey is to notice how you show up, right? You don't need to be someone else. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to have all the answers. You just need to be the author of your own leadership journey and let that be the story that people remember. Thank you so much. That concludes my presentation, and I really hope that today offered, not just ideas, but some real tools and for reflection and for alignment. So thank you for being here.
Can I call you every Monday to lift me up?
Yeah. There for you.
That makes me feel better.
For those who don't know, this is one of my wonderful board co-presidents for the leadership board.
That's for folks that can get the introduction. I'll just summarize. I'm a small business owner and I call myself a glorified volunteer. I just serve on 8 or 9 different boards and 1 and 2 are right here. Really appreciate that, especially this conversation around authenticity. Because the next section, we're going to talk about, well, what is your leadership style? How do you frame things? What's the perspective you show up with? And I think when we talk about my individual style and Michael's individual style, there's something that's not really discussed, which is what happens when those things aren't compatible. May or may not be a real situation, but what happens if they don't mesh well? And so let's talk about that dynamic, right? So a couple of goals for this for this section. One is to understand the interpersonal conflict that shows up in competing leadership styles. Second is to give you a framework to classify and organize these behaviors. And then lastly is, well, within that framework, how do you show up? What is the gift that you actually bring to the table? And so I want to start by thinking about a group situation, right? So imagine a time when you're with other leaders, you're with your teams, and you've got to work through a problem. For the Columbia Ability folks, this might be too real with, all of you here, but think about a group example and an issue is put on the table. You look at it, you make sense of it, you're like, I know the answer. I've seen this before. But before you can put the answer out there, somebody else pipes in and says, well, I think we should try this. You're like, that's great. We tried it 5 years ago and it didn't work. And before you can drop wisdom on everybody, somebody else pipes in and says, well, yeah, but I think we could also go this direction. Like, I don't even know if that's legal. Before you know it, you have 50 different styles and approaches and ideas, none of which make any sense to you. And I just want you to think about, like, what does it feel like when you have this conflict with somebody that has a different style compared to yours? And this segment's probably sponsored by whatever the Tri-City Chamber's algorithm
Today
is.
you and tomorrow you aren't the same person. If you're
What do you
tired
say?
of what Today You is doing, get an accounting fundamentals certificate from WGU School of Business and get a whole new Tomorrow You in just 6 months. Enroll today at WGU.
Hey,
This is a square. Can you guess which spot that goes in?
The square.
That's right. It goes in the square hole.
Yes. Okay.
And how about this rectangle? That one,
Also the square.
that goes in there too.
Yeah.
Up next, we've got this thin rectangle.
The thin
Can you
rectangle.
guess where that goes?
The thin rectangle.
That's right. It goes in the square hole. And up next, a cylinder.
The circle.
I think that goes in
The circle.
the square hole. Now, we've also got this semicircle right here. Do you see a slot that would fit
The semicircle.
semicircle?
The semicircle.
That's right, it's the square hole. Okay. Up next, the triangle. We know what hole that goes
The
into,
triangle.
right?
Triangle.
That's right, the square hole. And up next, we have the arch.
The arch. The
And
arch.
you guessed it,
The arch.
it goes in the square hole. This is a rectangle.
Yeah.
Up next,
time jumping. There we go. Anytime 2 different people have a competing idea of how to get from point A to point B, there is inherently conflict built in. And conflict isn't the problem. The problem is there are 2 different types of conflict. There's unproductive and productive. And in an unproductive space, that's where you feel those emotional tensions, right? We start judging and having a reaction and rejecting these different ideas. And that's not where we're trying to live. Where we want to be is in the productive space, where it's not about the person, but it's about the ideas and what's the perspective that they're bringing and I'm bringing. And can we put those 2 together to create a solution better than any one individual can contribute on their own? And so when we think about your different leadership styles, I want to get out of this sort of classical definition of strengths and weaknesses, right? We think, well, this is the best possible approach to leadership. As you heard Audrey talk about, that's not true. People are individuals. You have your lived experience, right? You bring something unique to the table, but it creates these defaults rather than strengths and weaknesses, right? Your professional identity is a combination of your family upbringing, your career journeys, all of that lived experience that makes you who you are, and it's going to create a default. It's where you start. When you're encountering a problem or a dynamic, you're going to begin approaching it in a certain way, and there's a natural course or a natural corresponding blind spot to that. It's not necessarily inherently great or bad. It's just an awareness that there is a perspective you cannot see. And even though we're speaking the same language, we're saying different things. It doesn't resonate. So it's two words I might ask you to keep in the back of your mind as we go through this are resonance and dissonance. People have a natural inclination based on that professional identity to move towards certain ideas and solutions. And the ones that you're moving away from are going to create those emotional reactions. You're not going to trust it. It's not going to work for you. And that's the model I encourage looking at here is, as you heard Audrey talk about in the example of creating that understanding, understanding is what helps us solve these interpersonal problems, right? At the top, there's something happening. There's a different leadership style. There's some sort of strategy that doesn't make sense to you. It's outside of your field of view, and it's creating tension. The first thing you have to be able to do is actually be aware that that's happening. Notice that within yourself, and then name it. What is the actual thing taking place? And then begin comparing and contrasting. What's happening with me? What's happening with the situation? The better I can understand that and name it, the faster I can get to a solution. Now that I know what the conflict is, the ultimate goal is how do I recognize and value this other perspective that's being brought in? If you go back to your defaults, maybe there's a blind spot, and I appreciate that somebody else is bringing this to the table. Real example is one of my team members. We've worked together for about 20 years. And up until year 17, drove me absolutely crazy that every idea we came to at the table, they would shoot down. They're like, that's not gonna work. This person's not gonna follow through. You already know that person's gonna quit. It became an endless shooting down of ideas. If one day I was just like, you have to get on board. This is driving me nuts. And the more that we built up our relationship and actually started talking about those dynamics, what we realized is I'm Mr. Sunshine and Rainbows. I don't think anything's ever gonna fail. I think it's a great idea and I believe in my team. They bring in that blind spot where I can't see the realities that yes, actually the person we've tasked is not gonna follow through. Or no, we don't have the right resources, or no, this is the wrong context. And now that we've learned how to work that dynamic, this person brings in that perspective so that I already know here are the 15 ways this plan's gonna fail. How do we make it better? We avoid those pitfalls, we avoid those mistakes. But it's a requirement looking at what is their leadership style and not outright rejecting it, but figuring out how do I facilitate the relationship, knowing that this is a source of conflict because there's you, there's me, and then there's that space in between leading into the space part. How do you manage that dynamic? And it really begins with classifying and organizing those behaviors in a way that makes sense. So let's provide some terms. Bowman and Deal give us these 4 different leadership frames. Think of them as a pair of glasses you put on. And if you're this particular leader, you look at the world through this perspective. If you're a human resources leader, chances are you think in terms of people, right? If you're not meeting the mission, something's not happening in the organization, you're wondering about, well, who are the people in it? Are they motivated? Are they inspired? Do they have the resources to be successful? Meanwhile, the structural people are saying, well, that's great, but what's our process? If we don't have a rigorous process, it doesn't matter whether how happy the people are, if they like each other, we're not ever going to be at our mission this way. Then the symbolic people step in and says, but you mentioned mission. Do people actually connect to the mission? Do they know why we do the things we do? Stealing the Simon Sinek, why, how, what? Why does the organization exist? Do people have clarity around our purpose in the organization? And then lastly, you have your political leaders, which it sounds adversarial, right? Like we think of politics with this negative connotation. Really, those leaders are the ones that are saying what nobody else is willing to say. Do we have enough resources? Are the right people in the room? Who are our champions that are going to advocate for this? Is there an inherent power dynamic that we need to really address? Rely on those folks for solutions. Let's put a real person in the same framework. So good case study here, Dolores Huerta. Dolores was the founder, well, co-founder of the United Farm Workers Union, right? She understood operations incredibly well, right? She built a system and a hierarchy that was able to organize and connect people across regions, counties, states, and nationally. But then she also knew that those were real humans and those humans have needs and would go to houses, meet with individuals. What are you struggling with? What resources do you need? How is your family? She understood the human resources frame. Politically, she noticed nobody was writing articles about field workers getting cancer from pesticides. But there was a national conversation around those pesticides in relation to environmental damage and conflict. Well, she thought, what if I brought those people over to my cause? And if we get rid of pesticides that way, I still solve my problem. She invented environmental justice in that way. And then lastly, on the symbolic frame, people need a North Star, and she created Si Se Puede, right? Yes, we can. That became so powerful that even after President Obama was elected, using Yes, We Can, he invited her to the White House to say, hey, thank you for letting me borrow your slogan. Think about the people you know, think about your own leadership style. Where do you tend to spend your time? Do you find yourself in a political space? Do you dance around between them? Because the interesting thing about this is you also build skills in those domains. Right? If you're a human resources leader, you might find yourself very interested in books about relationship management and trust and conflict. Think Brene Brown and Patrick Lencioni. You might have even gone so far as to get credentials from SHRM or degrees in psychology. You probably learn through experiences with people and you like organizing yourself in that way. And what I think is interesting about this framework is so much is done under the bucket of leadership, but it doesn't really explain leadership what or leadership how. And the reality is people gravitate towards these different frames. And once you understand that inclination, you can recognize where you are, what your gift is, what you bring to the table, and also be able to understand, I see why I might have a conflict in this space with this particular person or this particular issue. And now I can better address that and get to the problem solving mode. And Bowman and Deal will self-admit there is no perfect sort of way of synthesizing this and saying you can only ever be in the space when you're answering this kind of a problem. But they do suggest that there are 4 basic questions to ask of what kind of issue am I likely facing, right? If you're talking about quality, efficiency, productivity, chances are you're in the structural space. If there's a lack of clarity, people don't understand what they're supposed to be doing, you probably need to be a symbolic leader. And the thing I would throw out is when we think about your authenticity and where you sit in experience with teams and CEOs, really is no right answer, right? In the literature, the science will tell you that, yeah, in some cases, individuals that can work in 2 and 3 frames are more successful than 1. But then books on successful organizations only deal with structural and human resource related issues. Individuals that books are written about are political and symbolic. There's just no conclusion. And I've met people that are so dominant and gifted of one particular frame. It seems like it doesn't matter what the problem is. They know how to solve it that way. Was chatting with a colleague a few weeks ago that they described, we've got this person, we don't speak the same language, they're causing havoc and chaos in my team, I gotta figure this out. It's like, that seems like slam dunk human resources. I think some coaching, some this, maybe in a year you guys will have a great relationship. And they're sitting there like, yeah. Or I can move in this apartment and reorganize the structure and never deal with them again, and my company could. It's like political answer, but yeah, that seems fair. I think you just hit a bunch of endings, right? Like they're able to see that perspective, which I obviously can't. And that's the idea is, what is your gift? The better you know your gift and you can show up authentically, when these moments of conflict show up, can you also readily acknowledge what's Michael's gift? What's Audrey's gift? How do we function together and offset those blind spots and create something really spectacular? And so the leave behind I have for you and for the folks on Zoom, there's a link to the form, very easy questionnaire to fill out. Choose the answer that most likely resonates with you, and then you'll get a score that looks like this. And what I found is, yeah, it explained, why do I tend to look towards certain books? Why have I pursued certain education? Because I'm very dominantly an HR leader. I think in terms of people. If you tell me a system isn't working, I'm like, well, great, why are they rejecting your system? Go have individual conversations. I know it's going to be really, really difficult for me to have a structural conversation. I try and make sure I have lean into the folks that do have that gift to offset my blind spot. Now. I'm curious why.
Thank you, Brian. I hope you don't mind, but I am gonna stand up and sit all day long. Do me a favor, turn to one of your neighbors, give them some knuckles and tell them, buckle up, buttercup. Yeah, buckle up. We're gonna talk about accountability. Holy smokes. So what's the first word, phrase, just yell it out, comes to mind when you think about accountability and how it shows up in your organization? Accountability, how's it show up?
Ownership.
Ownership, love it.
Write-ups.
What was that?
Right.
Write-ups, right. Other thoughts?
Defensiveness.
Defensiveness, yeah, where did that come from? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, often, when we think about accountability, so many times traditionally it's transactional, right? You do a thing, you get a thing. So we never think of it, at least I don't think most people do, in terms of if you do a great job, congratulations, we're gonna continue to employ you. We're probably gonna pay you every 2 weeks at the end of the year. You might get a raise. If you're real lucky, you might get a bonus. We don't frame it that way. It's usually who's to blame, who's responsible for this thing that didn't go well. So if you didn't do a thing, there's some kind of consequence that comes along with it. If you did a thing, you didn't do it well, it comes with some kind of consequence, it's pain. If you didn't do a thing on time, it comes with consequence or pain. So it's transactional. It fails to build relationships. When we listen to Audrey and Brian, a lot of they were talking about is we're gonna build trust, we're gonna influence, we're gonna build relationships. Traditional accountability doesn't get us there. And when I think about leadership, I think of leadership as being about influence. So this kind of goes back to that Simon Sinek quote. We have to have trust with our teams if we're gonna influence. How many of you are familiar with John Maxwell? Maxwell has a quote that says, a leader is one that knows the way, goes the way, and shows the way. So think about this. Not every leader, and you're not just a leader by title, right? So not every leader knows the way. Would you agree with this? Yeah, right. So a true leader can set that endpoint, that what's that North Star you just mentioned, that place that we're all going, we cast the vision, right? As leaders, this is what we're called to do. But then we go the way. This is the road often less traveled. It can be rocky, it can be perilous, where we make tough decisions. There's stretching real moments in that thing, but what's really cool, if we'll walk it out, we're showing the way to our teams. We're demonstrating this. And as leaders, all eyes are on you, right? The fish rods the head, everybody knows it. So they're welcome to see what you do. So we heard about vulnerability. And if we go the way and it's uncomfortable, but as leaders, if we can get vulnerable, we can establish trust, we can build relationships. So when I think about accountability, I want to introduce you to something that's accountability 2.0. It's going to move on from the transactional into this space where it's not who's responsible for that problem that just occurred, but instead who's responsible for the solution, right? We're going to flip the script on this thing. There's some authors, Tate et al. They wrote this book called Conscious Accountability. Read it. It's really good. It's not real big. My team's in the middle of a group read on it. I've read it a couple of times myself. I think what you're going to find is we talk about the connect model that shows up in conscious accountability. There's a lot of tools that you're going to be familiar with. One of the things that resonated with me about this model is things that I've been picking up from different leadership gurus and trainings and finding things that work for me and been putting in a toolbox. They showed up in this model called Connect. It's super cool. And the way it works, so this is accountability 2.0. We're going to work to build relationships and at the same time we're pursuing results, and we can do it simultaneously and have some incredible outcomes with our team. And I think you're going to see some things my friends here talked about show up. You ready to go? All right, we're going to start out by creating clarity. When you look at organizations, particularly organizational failure, you do some root cause analysis on this, ask the 5 whys, get down to what really happened. More often than not, we find we had some amount of miscommunication. It's often a culprit in any of our relationships, right? Something's a little amiss, we can find it in communication. So we've got to be really clear, right? We got to find ways to create clarity. And this kind of goes back to that influence. As leaders, we're going to set the endpoint. So one of the things that we have to do is what's the target? What's the goal? What are we all chasing? And then we set reasonable expectations for our teams. The teams need to know the role, whose role is it? What's the goal? They know what their decision-making authority is. And then we unbridle people, they run, we support them, and they do amazing things. So if I think about creating that clarity around where we're going, I'm gonna run a little experiment. It's unscripted. I'm gonna put some of my people on the spot here. We're gonna judge my leadership here because if they don't respond correctly, this is 100% on me. If I was to ask you, Columbia Ability Alliance, what are we on our way to do? Where are we going?
create more diverse community with inclusion.
Yeah, there you go. So this is part of our mission statement right here. One of the things you'll hear from our teams, stated another way, Sherry, you're smiling. Did you have something on your lips?
Create access for work to, for everyone and build, break down barriers.
Yeah, we're breaking down barriers, creating a more inclusive community for all to enjoy, right? Now, one of the things that you'll hear our team say is, we're on our way to serve more people and be financially viable doing it. We want to make sure to keep the doors open so we can keep serving more people, right? So we create clarity around it, because we can build everything we do around that thing. So clarity is super important if we want to move the needle and move forward. Opening up engagement, this is huge. This is hearing voices from throughout our organization. There's a phrase that's called voices from below. And that shouldn't be a negative comment. What it means is literally from line level staff all the way through our organization. We want to hear from everybody. You got to create psychological safety if you're going to do this. How many of you have ever been in a space where you asked the tough question, you laid down the hard truth, or you shared an innovative and creative idea and it was not received well? Yeah, sometimes it happens, right? Some people don't want to hear from you. We want to make sure that we open that up, truly hear from our team members. So we find different ways to do it. So my organization, what we do is we will include different levels of employees, line level staff in organizational planning endeavors. And we do it in a lot of different ways. And it isn't, we don't bring everybody in to sit at a table, for every conversation we have. That'd be putting 200 people in a room and that get real messy real fast. But we can have a representative sample. So we bring people in from throughout our organization to be a part of this conversation. Sometimes the best ideas come from the most unlikely of places. And so this is why I like to infuse it in here. Brian was talking about different ideas and the conflict that might exist. That healthy conflict is going to allow us to tug and pull on ideas, and we can drive innovation in that space. It's pretty cool. And we can achieve bigger outcomes, do it with a higher degree of frequency. What do you think happens when we include people from throughout our organization, maybe it's line level staff, into these spaces, into these conversations? Aside from doing something innovative.
They feel valued.
Yeah, value. Yeah.
People feel heard.
Yeah, feel heard, right? Seen, valued, heard. We're building relationships, results. We're building relationships as we're driving results. The other really cool thing that happens, we build internal champions for change. So these individuals come in, they're a part of this process, they're a key contributor. They go back, this is influence, they've got referent power, they can speak to their peer group in a way that I cannot. So I've got this title, right? But they've got a relationship with the people they're working with all day long. And they can tell them, hey, I was included in this conversation. They really wanted to hear my voice. They used my idea. Or if we didn't, they understand why. And instead of this being this situation where somebody threw an idea out with a black hole of administration, never to be seen again, they were seen, valued, and heard. So they positively influenced their peer group. We do that across our organization, and we've got a whole lot of people helping us move the needle. So we're building relationships while we're driving results. Nailing it. This is, somebody had said owning it. This is kind of the essence of accountability in my mind. We're meeting and beating expectations. We're being we own our commitments, right? We're doing what we say we're going to do. We're managing our priorities well. I'm not going to spend a ton of time here because I kind of know what this is. But noticing is important. So when we notice, this is being situationally aware in our organizations, but outside of our organizations as well. And as leaders, we want to be accountable in both of these spaces. So when we think internally, it's doing the check-ins, what's going on with our teams, celebrating those wins, but also noticing maybe something's a little amiss. We make sure that they're properly resourced, they have good understanding on what it is that we're working towards. Maybe we need to create clarity and good expectations, and then we can go run and do cool things. Outside of our organization, what's happening in industry, what's happening in the community, the state, across the country, what's happening with the economy, social, cultural climate, politically, legally. So we're doing environmental scanning. The reason we want to do these things is not wait till trouble finds its way to our door, or we miss an opportunity because we weren't paying attention. Instead, we're noticing, we're spotting these things early, and we're making adjustments as organizations. If we get really good at this as leaders, instead of constantly being in this space where we're fighting fires, how many of you find yourself in this space on a daily basis fighting some kind of fire? There's just stuff churning and burning. It happens, right? This is the thing that can allow us to get in front of some of that. We got to lift our gaze, go after something bigger, but we have to be aware, we have to notice. Exchanging feedback. This is so huge. If we don't know how we're doing, we begin to read and believe our own press releases. It's true. I'm pretty much a legend in my own mind. Oh, yeah. Oh, seriously, just that.
What's your legacy, Michael?
Ask me, I'll tell you, pretty darn amazing. I need people in my life that can keep it really real, right? But in all honesty, I've seen this happen. I'm certainly, have been susceptible to this, but I've seen it happen with organizations and individuals where they've done a really good job, which is awesome, right? They did the right things right. They continue to do it. But they keep doing the same thing, so they're not innovative and creating and figuring out what's coming next and leveraging those opportunities out in the community. Somebody moves the goalpost, you get downstream and industries left them behind. It takes a lot to catch up, so feedback's so important. My friend Sherry here has a comment that she makes, and I think that you probably heard this before, and it's that feedback is a gift. Have you heard this before? Feedback's a gift. So here's what I would say. If you're gonna give it to somebody, treat it as such. Wrap that thing up real nice and put a bow on it. Does not mean you dilute it. Doesn't mean you sugarcoat it, right? But it might mean that, we gotta take that conversation offline, have it in a private space. We're noticing people, are they emotionally ready to have that conversation so they can receive it? And then if you're gonna receive it, assume positive intent. Sometimes that thing hits a little hard, but know that people generally want to see you can be the best person you can be. And sometimes it's so the org can be the best it can be, so we can deliver on whatever that promise of service is to everybody that we're called to serve. So feedback, super, super powerful. My meetings, I'm real good about being proactive about looking for feedback. I'm not so good about giving it, right? So the meetings with my senior team members, almost all, you can nod in disagreement, so call me out here if I'm wrong. Almost always end with me asking, how can I be a better leader? Tune me up. How can I better support you? And what's really cool is my team members reciprocate, and we're building a culture where this real-time feedback is happening all the time. We want this to trickle down, and we're getting this going on between our team members. It's super cool. If you get feedback, you've got to do something with it though, right? So I get this good piece of information, knowing I've got blinders on, I'm asking my team to tune me up. So I go do something with it. And you want to make sure it didn't just go into a black hole. I come back and say, hey, Justin, thanks so much for sharing that with me. I took action on it. Did you see it? Because he might not have noticed. Now he does, seeing, valued, heard. We're creating belonging. We're building relationships. We're going to go drive some results. Pretty awesome. It's quite possible I come back to Justin and say, hey, Justin, thanks for sharing that with me. I took some action on it. Did you see it? He's like, yeah, Michael, about that. That's not what I was talking about. Oh, it means the problem, whatever that thing was, it still exists. So I get clarity on it. We had some miscommunication that I could take action on it. For me, I really am not super good about giving feedback. I did not have great role models in that space. So I'm always fearful of breaking somebody by giving feedback. So something I did years ago that made it really palatable for me, and I hope it's well received by others, is I will ask team members, can I give you a coachable moment? And I hope they receive it as I intend and as I say it. I want to, provide you a little piece of something that I'm seeing that's going to allow you to crank that thing out of the park, right? Be successful in that space. Notice I'm asking though. And the reason I ask, can I give you a coachable moment, is it gives the team member the opportunity to say, hey, Michael, now's really not a good time. And that's okay. We're still going to have a conversation. It just might not be right now, but it's okay because they might be on a deadline. They might be nailing it, right? They're meeting this obligation and they are creating clarity for me around whatever that objective is that they need to do, but I might disrupt it. So maybe we need to talk tomorrow, or maybe they're running high on emotion. I mean, if that's the case, we're going to have barriers to good communication. They're not listening. Speaking of listening, something that kind of fits into this bucket is doing check-ins with team members. So I'm a big fan of doing this with not only my direct reports, but other people. How many of you are familiar with active listening? Yeah, so I'm gonna go like this because there's a model I was introduced to many years ago, and I can picture the graphic every time I say active listening. It's this little wheel. So I'm gonna walk you around it. Here's how it might look if I'm doing a check-in with a team member. First of all, we're gonna do more listening than we are talking, right? So 80-20 rule, 80% listening, 20% talking. We are gonna reserve judgment. So I mean, if Billy Buttons or Susie Cream Cheese serves on your team and they are full of drama, and every time they come at you, here it is, man. It's gonna be the excuse rodeo or something. We got to put it aside for a moment, park it in the parking lot, and just believe that today's the day that they're gonna need me to show up as their leader. We're gonna need to have a conversation. They need me to be present in that space. Some other things we want to avoid doing: filling in the blanks, interrupting, or working on a rebuttal. The moment we do any of those things, we stopped listening, right? And we're missing what's going on. This is where miscommunication can happen because we're always rushing for the thing that we want to interject in that space. So we start with an open-ended question, and it could be something as simple as, how's it going? You know, and then I hear from Sarah, she goes, oh, it's going pretty well in this challenging project I'm working on. I'm gonna move to a probing question, but it's not gonna be me running to an assumption, challenging project, oh. I know Sarah's working on a gala, so it must be the gala, right? She says, yes, that's a yes or no question binary, the conversation just ended. Instead I say, what's so challenging about the project we're working on? She starts talking and she's talking, I'm listening, I'm learning, seeing value hurt, but you know what I'm listening for? Is there something going on with her situation that I have a resource I can feed into her success? That's where we're gonna build a relationship, we're gonna drive organizational outcomes. So Sarah's spieling at me, I'm listening, I'm learning, and then I need to get some clarity for myself. And so I'll seek clarity, and here's the way that I'll ask my team this, I'll say something along the lines of, educate me, I'm not familiar, help me understand. Here's what I love about this. I don't treat this power dynamic that's here, Sarah, and I can have an open out conversation any day of the week, but at the end of the day, I'm the CEO of the organization. We just switched this thing because she's the driver, she's the subject matter expert, the person with industry knowledge that I need her in this situation to help me understand so we can go do something cool together. Then I'm gonna demonstrate clarity by paraphrasing, and it's using my words, my meanings to make sure that we've got understanding. And so if I'm understanding you right, Sarah, here's what I heard is going on. And Sarah has this great opportunity to say, yeah, Michael, you nailed it. Or no, Michael, that's not at all what I was talking about. So we can get clarity so we can move on. The next steps in that active listening model include being aware of and attuned to feelings. Goes right back to noticing, right? What's going on with our team member? Maybe now's not a good time to have this conversation. And then that final step is really just summarizing what we're going to do next steps. And that's creating clarity around it. Who's going to own the role? What's the goal of this thing? And we can see good success in it. The next step here is claiming it, right? It's the buck stops here. It's this whole idea. Somebody said ownership right out of the gate. We've got to own these mistakes. And I don't know about you, but for me, I ran into leaders that were carrying this persona. They were perfect and wanted everybody to believe it. Right. And it can create cultures of fear if nobody believes that, if everybody believes they have to be perfect, but nobody believes they can be, right? Which is an unreasonable expectation. So the really cool thing is if we are willing to own it as leaders, there's some things I love to do in this space is own it, but do it in a group setting. Right, if I have a failure and a shortcoming and I do it to get vulnerable, to take us right back to building relationships and working to drive influence. So if the house is on fire, it's the team that says, hey man, let's go in there and get the wedding albums, right? You got some people that are true followers in this space. So own this mistake, right? Create safety in this place. And my hope is that my team will do the same thing for their team members. So we don't have these mistakes that are getting swept under the rug that we're all tripping over. Somebody took ownership of this thing so we can move on. Another reason I want to own it in that group setting is we institutionalize the learning behind it, right? So everybody can learn from the shortcoming and failure. But if we get comfortable with everybody doing this, which our team's in a place where they're throwing things out like this, we can all learn from it and build a better organization. And if we can do that, you know, in my organization, one of the ways that we create psychological safety and we deal with this ownership situation is the mistake happened. This is just part of our model, but what did you learn from it? How are we going to avoid doing it again, right? So when we move to the next step of this is what did we learn from it and what are we going to try again? Right, we're going to go make some tweaks on that thing. We're going to take the next run at this endeavor and drive these results, and we can do it because we built great relationships across our team. Friends, that is conscious accountability at a really high level, 30,000 foot flyover. You have a flyer that has the model. It has more information. I encourage you to take a deeper dive into this thing. But there's also a self-assessment survey. So here's what I would encourage you to do. Your homework for the day, should you choose, if you're bold, confident, and courageous, and want to find yourself in a good space, find 2 or 3 people that you know that could be trusted resources, and I mean trusted to give you some honest feedback. Have them assess you using that tool. You assess yourself. They can do it anonymously, slip it on your door, under your door on a Friday afternoon, and then compile the results. See how you showed up when you assess yourself compared to how others see you, and then find those areas where you can dig a little bit deeper, build relationships and drive results. That's what I had for you.
Well, you guys, that was a very amazing presentation. I know I was writing fast and furiously. So we're gonna open it up for Q&A. And people are saying it was great as well on that and Zoom and everything. So is there any questions from anybody here in person? There's a hand down there.
So we're talking about like authenticity, being your real self, but then working on your faults So if you have to work on like active listening, communication and stuff, right, it's not your bag, right? That's not your strong point. Where are you going? Because it seems like three different areas.
I'll just take a run at active listening. I think if you get really good in that space, it could lead to better outcomes in both of these spaces, right? So I think if we're gonna show up and lead authentically, if we're going to lead, we've got to listen, right? And Audrey talked about trust and influence in this space. And then Brian was talking about the different ways we show up and what's important to us. But at the end of the day, we're still working with people. And if we're not listening and haven't figured this piece out and develop relationships to truly understand what's going on, but then have a partner in this space, I think we're going to struggle there too. And when we talk about that conflict and how do we find our way through it, I think that's probably one of the best ways we can do it is just, empathy, right? Seek to understand, but we got to just sit quiet in this space and really learn from others.
Yeah, I would throw out, like, what's your version of it? When you think about the authenticity, like, what does relationship building look like for you? What does listening look like for you? Michael gave a couple of answers of how he solicits feedback and asks those questions. In therapy, there's ORs, right? Open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries. If that's a kit that works for you. Another organization I know, their mantra is what I heard you say. Those are all active listening, but which is the one that feels right to you? Like, how do you like to be heard? How do you want to work with others? Can you make these things your own?
Yeah, I think just to briefly add, I think too, just the awareness of acknowledging, right? Oh, I have, I don't know, an opportunity for growth in this one bucket, right? Like that, to me, I interpret that and capture that as, oh, that is your authentic self, right? You're aware that, oh, I have an opportunity here, but I can still fulfill, I can still work towards active listening, right? Towards different communication methods of what I'm capturing, things like that. So I think that just that sort of embodied lens, that body perception and awareness really lends itself to being the most authentic we can.
If someone notices, whether it's team or leadership building, as leaders, would you say that if someone brought it to you and said, I think I really need to work on X, Y, and Z within these walls, that you allow them to do that within the workplace to feel that training and like to work with the group itself? Or do you feel like it's more of a personal, like you have to work on it outside of work? As leaders, do you allow that, to be present with them? Do you do that training with them? Do you put yourself in that shoe? And do you also allow every DC, every step of whether you're CEO all the way down to the receptionist? Do you allow that open communication? And how do you deal with that? And how would you take that? I guess that was a lot of questions, sorry.
I love that. I don't know, we're just gonna go this.
Yeah, exactly. I'm ready.
Honestly, like as I was listening to that question, I'm like, yes, bring it on, right? Like this whole feeling for me, when I have a team member who's like, hey, I recently had a team member who was like, hey, I really wanna learn more about like Adobe Photoshop. And while we do use that in our, in our organization, like, I don't know, it's, we use it maybe like 20% of the time, not a whole lot. And I was like, great, you're interested in that professional development opportunity. Let's do that. Let's grow together in that. If that's something that is going to contribute to this organization and buckle down and contribute to your professional development, and it's something that, you're eager, you're excited about, trifecta. Let's make that happen.
Yeah, my big philosophy is that it's about the team you have and the organization you want to have. And so it's an easy cop out of like, it depends. But that's the reality is, who do you have and what does safety feel like to them? Where you're going to have an environment where it's okay to make mistakes, but mistakes how, mistakes where, learning where, what are the guardrails you put up that make sense both for your organization and your team? What's going to allow them to thrive? If they work best individually, like, great. Let's figure out what, additional pay time looks like. Let's figure out what external learning opportunities there are if you want to work with a coach. Or if your team is like, no, we love Michael. We want to work on this together. Let's do it during cabinet meetings or whatever that environment is. Build the thing that makes sense around that person and your organization.
Yeah, for us, we're such big believers in that. We put on our strategic plan, and this was with our board, build a culture of inquiry. And then our team, we have made a team goal, organization wide, that, people need to invest in a growth opportunity, some kind of learning opportunity that supports their position, either what they currently have or where they want to go. And we resource it, so we didn't have a budget for that before, and now we do, and then we're doing organization-wide trainings, where Rita Bryans actually came in and done a training with our team, which has been outstanding. Across our leadership team, something that bubbled up years ago was leadership development. We have 17 managers that come together on a monthly basis, and we're in that space, so for us, where our organization is going, what we recognize we needed to do, if we had somebody that came up, I want to learn more about this, or I think that there's an opportunity for me here. You know, as long as it fit within their, either what they're currently doing, or what they want to do, but it helps us achieve our organizational goals. We're sold out. We're all in.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question.
I really.
Yeah. Any other questions? So one of the questions I had was, how do you handle it? You're talking about your authentic self. So how do you deal with that if who you are clashes with organizational culture or expectation? And I think that all three of you really talked about leadership and being authentic to yourself in the ways that you do that. So how do you line that up?
Start with the middle out.
Love it.
So again, wearing many hats, right? Like a couple of small businesses and different boards, but my primary day job is a McDonald's franchise in Othello. And that's a really good example where our LLC takes 70+ people that never dreamed about working for you, never thought about you as a career destination. And we have to figure out how to motivate them to deliver high quality experiences. That's my everyday problem to solve. And so for us, it's about, you know, happy people making people happy. That's our vision. That's our culture that we want. We want people that have all the resources and safety that they need to be successful. And then when you're dealing with being under a brand, it's much harder for a brand overseeing 15,000 restaurants to look at the same way individually to our people. And so for many, many years, I struggled with that value system between, well, I've instilled these values in our organization. Our people work for us for these reasons. But those are different values than the parent organization, right? The franchise is looking at fail fast, data, numbers, specifics. And so that's where this whole like defaults and blind spots kind of comes in, is I know I am just completely opposite to how the organization works. So I'm the one doing the translating. I know that when brand comes in, whatever I've done on the people side needs to translate to numbers. They may not be interested in, you know, the coaching we did or the new programs we installed or the training, but how did those things lead to key performance indicators? How do they lead, you know, what are their success measurements? And that makes me sleep at night, because it's no longer this judgment of their values being right or wrong. It's about how do I translate between those two things, because we both have a vested interest in this being successful. It does me no good to be in an adversarial relationship with an organization that I'm a part of. Otherwise, why am I on this boat? I should get out. So that's where I see that interplay coming in, and the nuance of what resonates with me and where the dissonance is.
Such a good example. Michael, I think.
Do you mind if I?
No, please.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna tag you here with Brian, because immediately when I captured that question, I immediately thought of blind spots, right? Like identify those blind spots. And I've definitely been in a situation where I work for a different organization that, you know, I don't know, the board of directors makes the call and I don't necessarily agree with it in that current position. And I think ultimately it comes down to different exercises of identifying those blind spots and sort of distilling it down to find the common thread. Why am I here? Why am I interested in this organization? What are we achieving? Who are we serving? Why does this matter to me as an authentic leader? And how can I continue to sort of serve and show up for this organization I care deeply about, and also show up for myself as a leader and continue to question, right, my values and continue to stay true to those values as they evolve, right? And at the end of the day, if, you know, you go through an assortment of different exercises and you can't find that common thread, well, that's a whole different conversation, right? And that's okay. It's okay to be able to say, wow, maybe I've outgrown this, or maybe, you know, it just isn't place for me, and then have that psychological safety to have those conversations with your own leadership.
You don't dance well together.
Right, exactly, yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah, so, we've invested a lot of energy in culture, and culture being shared values, attitudes, and beliefs. And so one of the things that we did probably 3 years ago now is we had a cross section of our team come together and develop our own team values. So it was representative of the whole organization. Just earlier this year, when was it? Was it early this year? February, we came back together to take a look at those values because, the organization changes, people come, people go, but we want to make our values are so important to what we do. And we came back together, representative sample, different people in the room to take a look at our values, and we walked all the way back through. Are these the right values today? And so the overarching values stayed the same. We've got these value statements to support people in these values. We made some mild tweaks to make sure that there was clarity in that and we could get the team behind it, right? And good stuff there, but one of the things that we do to make sure that it's really baked into what we do, our values show up all over the place. Our annual performance evaluation are tied back to values. We have team members, not leadership. When we have all staff meetings, picking a value, we have people working from different departments that don't normally work together. They come together and then they share best practice. They have us do activities, cool stuff with values. But we want to make sure they're walked out. And then I think it goes to where we just wound up here. If we've got the values misalignment, we're clearly stating, well, these are our operational values. We hire by them, we coach, we counsel, and we'll release people by them if they're not a fit, if they did something that violated the values, not just that, seems like we have conflict, but they literally violated it. But our hope is we're walking this out and talking it out, and it's not just a poster on the wall, that if we found somebody in this space for some reason that this is just not a good fit for us, for me, cool, let's help you find your next best gig, and maybe we build a really cool partner there, right? Doesn't mean we can't be friends and do some cool things in the community, but just might not be happening within our walls.
Well, you guys all did such a fantastic job today. Will you guys please help me well, thank you. Afterwards, Michael's gotta head out to be at another 2x5, but if you guys are interested in connecting with any of the experts, the business cards are on the back, and for those on Zoom, you will get the handouts sent out to you after this event. So I just wanted to thank again STCU that they make this event free of charge to all the entire business community in the Tri-Cities, and we're so grateful for that. And thank you to the audience. Thank you for being here. Thank you to those at home or in office on Zoom. We really appreciate it. Our June Asset Experts is on mental well-being and building a resilient workforce. I think it's going to be fantastic. Again, we have some excellent speakers lined up. For those of you attending here in person, on your way out, there's a flyer for next month's Asset Experts, and there's a survey that we would love for you to complete. Just helps us feel great and better job with it.